Hello and welcome to this brief modeling tutorial. This is going to be a discussion on how to go from mesh to sim using Quixel as a texturing interface and applying PBR materials to your model and incorporating this new technique into your workflow. I chose this mesh in particular because it's fairly complex, but it gives you a really good idea on how we go about getting this module of the model into the workflow and then eventually out to the sim. So what you can see here is this is a single mesh element, even though there are various aspects to it. You've got the frame itself, the floor, the seat, conduit, and the tube frame inside the fuselage cage here. And those, of course, all want to be different colors, and there's a way to achieve that in Quixel without working with multiple meshes, which just gobble up assets, and many systems just couldn't handle the workload of working with that many layers in Photoshop, in even 2K. I prefer to work in 4K. So this particular approach works really well for me, and I'm going to show you how to go about doing this. We'll start with the mesh. The important thing for Quixel is that your prep work is very well organized and clean. You can just do kind of a bulk UV map and have everything show up. It can be very confusing in the Quixel workflow. Quixel doesn't like jagged lines or things out of place. So if you do your prep work with your mesh, you can see here where all of my mesh elements are very organized. All the lines are straight. I try and keep the scale fairly symmetrical so that when we go to do this work inside the Quixel workflow, that the various features, like wear aspects and chips and things like that, are uniform in their scale proportionate to the model. So just bear in mind that your mesh prep is well put together and ready to insert into the workflow. Now that we've checked our UVW mapping and made sure that everything is ready to go to work over in Quixel, we'll go ahead and export this part out. Just going to call it frame. And I'm going to save it as an Autodesk FBX. And I'll do the same as an OBJ. That way I have the option of using either format in Quixel. Make sure if you're doing an OBJ export that in your faces, you select triangles, not quads or polygons. That's very important. So just always double check this, make sure that you're exporting out in the format that Quixel can use effectively. Check for any errors, and once you're done, the mesh is ready to go. So let's go ahead and apply the ambient occlusion lighting to the frame. It's very straightforward. Just add a standard skylight. And I'm going to render to texture. Select middle ray, global illumination. I'm going to double check my export file, make sure we're going to the proper location, and it's one of those things I always do to make sure that I don't have my assets go down the rabbit hole somewhere and have to chase them. So now we've got the metal ray assigned. We'll go down and clear our menu, and we're going to add the ambient occlusion elements to the renderer. I'm going to render this at 2K. It's a little bit quicker. A lot of times I'll take an AO map and I'll actually scale it up to 4K, and that softens a lot of the elements in the maps. That's just a personal preference. And we'll get the renderer started here. And this will take a couple minutes. We'll come back to this once the render is finished. Just bear in mind that once you set up the parameters, when this rendering process is done, it will automatically save the file out, so you don't have to do any more steps. You can just close out this menu and go to the next step in the process. You can see the render process is just ready to close out for the ambient occlusion map. We'll let this finish up and close this menu. And then we'll assign the material ID map to the mesh. Okay, we're done. We'll close this out. This is saved. Okay, I've gone ahead and gotten rid of the light source, and now we just have our basic mesh. We're going to apply the material ID to the mesh. This will allow Quixel to interpret the various components and apply the colors in the areas that you want. I've got 9 colors here. And you can see that I've applied material IDs to the various component elements. The frame is element 1, floor is 7, seat sides 8, and etc. as you move through the model. So this is all set up now to where Quixel can recognize the various elements that you want to paint. So we're going to open up the renderer again, and we'll just go down and clear out the occlusion settings and add a diffuse map to the renderer. I'm going to render this at 4K. One thing to bear in mind at this point is you'll see some gradations being rendered into the material ID map. These won't actually show up in your bitmap texture sheet. This is just an anomaly of the renderer. Quixel wants just solid colors. It can't work with any gradations in the material ID. If you run into this, just ignore it. Double check your map once it's been processed, and you'll see that you're just working with solid colors. Okay, this is rendered out. We'll let it close out. Quixel has their own color chart. And what this will do is exactly the same thing that you've done with your material ID. You can just come in and select any of the elements that you want to color to, assign your colors, and it will actually render out the color map and the mesh. I don't use this often. I have used it on individualized components, but when I'm working with various elements to a composite mesh, I prefer to have a little bit more control over how I send the mesh out. But this is a really simple interface. It does a lot of the work for you, and it's effective when you use it appropriately. So now we've saved out the mesh, we've saved out the color maps, and we're going to go ahead and close out Studio and go over to Quixel. Now we're in Photoshop, and I've launched the Quixel plugin. And the first step here is to actually set up your mesh. This is the D-Do interface. This is where you do your painting work. Over here on the left is N-Do, which is just an incredible asset in Quixel. You can do all of your bump mapping in 3 dimensions. When you're working with complex shapes, it really makes a big difference in the bump mapping workflow. We'll do a separate tutorial on that. For right now, we're just going to set up a mesh and tell you how to get colors out to either FSX or Prepared. The first thing we'll do is we'll go to where we've saved out our mesh, and you can see here I've got both my FBX and my OBJ. I'll open up the FBX, and we're going to tell Quixel where to load the material ID, and that's going to be this one right here. I did prepare a bump map ahead of time, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. And for this exercise, I'm not going to use the AO. I'm going to let Quixel build the AO, and you'll see the functionality inside the program. If I want to add the AO later, I can always do that later just by inserting that the way we would normally do it, putting that on top of a texture map and blending that in. For right now, we're just going to use the material ID and the normal. I'm going to set it for 4K. And it's important that you tell it ahead of time that your export target is going to be prepared. This will apply for either Prepared or FSX. We're going to tell it to create the model. So right now Quixel is building the various files and layers to give you the fundamental model to work in the three-dimensional workflow. Depending on the speed of your machine, this can take a couple minutes, so you might want to get a cup of coffee. And that was real time. No edits there, so you can see it's a fairly quick process. You tell it to go ahead and get started. Now we're ready to go. I'll open up the 3D interface, and now you can see we've got the model in the workspace in Photoshop. I'll just get this set up to where I'm comfortable with my workspace. This is the default lighting, and you can see the model already with my bump map supplied. I intentionally left a few rivets out. We'll go into this later, showing how to apply bump maps around corners, etc. It's a really handy feature. Something I want to show you really quickly. I'm going to be assigning a zinc chromate color to the model, and I want to match something that I've already done ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color sample this zinc chromate from a pre-existing file, and that way I can go to it and color match. Now when I apply this to the floor in the model, I've already got a color target that I can use. I'll go ahead and close this now that I've got the color. One of the features in Quixel, and one of the important aspects of working in Quixel, is that you can actually view the lighting in 3 dimensions in real time, much the way you would in the simulator. And rather than going through the hit and miss process that we would normally do of doing texture work, then viewing it in the sim, you can actually set up Quixel to approximate those lighting conditions in the sim and view your work in the development process, rather than going back repeatedly and redoing work over and over until you get it right. So I'm going to set up the lighting interface right now to where we get some reasonably good real-world light approximations. I'm setting up the ambient occlusion map right here, and this will give us occlusion lighting that it will build into a texture if you ask it to. And just setting up the workspace to where I'm approximating sim lighting, HDR lighting in particular. I'm going to turn on the light spin, and what we're going to use this for is to change the light angle in real time as we're working. And again, we're going to approximate the various conditions that we're going to see in the simulator. So at this stage we're ready to start applying colors. So let me zoom in here, and we're going to go back to our color ID map. We hold Shift C and it brings up our color ID map, and all you do is touch the area that you want to apply the texture to, and it opens up the materials editor. Now we're inside the materials editor, and you can see there is a very large library of assets to choose from. Quixel gives you the tools to go ahead and create your own if you want to get deeper into the workflow. It's actually kind of a interesting and fun process. For this exercise, I'm just going to use what we have available. So I'm going to go ahead and go to one of my trusty favorites. I'm going to apply this gunmetal texture to the floor. And once we're in, we'll go ahead and change the color of this texture to match the existing zinc chromate green that I've got in the interior skin of the model. We'll let this run in real time. And you can actually see the light moving around the work here. So the first thing you'll see is, of course, we're black, and we want to change that to our zinc oxide color. So I'll just take my 112, 125, and 62 and insert them here. So you can see we've changed the colors of the two primary colors, and right now I'm going to determine what color do I want my scratches on the floor to be. Typically you're going to be scratching the paint off, so you would be exposing metal. So let's just go ahead and turn this into a fairly neutral silver color, and do the same for this lubrication value. And I think what I want to do now is go back and darken these scratches up just a bit. And I'm going to add a specular value here. While I'm in the scratch layer, I'll go to the specular tab, and I'm going to open up that color palette again. I'm going to go to a more or less a sky blue-gray color. And now as the light moves around, you're going to see the specular value of this change. Again, this is pretty much the way you'd see it in the sim. Okay, now that we've applied the chromate green to the floor, I want to do the same for the seat sides. So we'll hold Shift C, select the seat, and I'm going to apply that same gunmetal color to the seat. When you're working in Quixel, you can determine where you want to stack your workflow. Now right here it's asking me if I want to add this color selection to the same layer I'm working on. I don't. I want to be able to control the values of the textures in the seat in a different workflow, so I'm going to tell it no to create a new series of layers. And once it's done applying these colors, I'm going to show you how in the menu it actually stacks these layers, and you can negotiate back and forth. Right now we're in the layer that I created for the seats. These are the four aspects of that layer, and we're going to back up one level, and now you'll see this is the layer that contains the floor, You can tell which layer you're working on by your color IDs, which are shown in the chip here over on the right. So I'm going to select the layer that contains the assets for the seat. I'm going to open up those layers, and now we're going to do the same as we did with the floor. We're going to assign those color values 112, 125, and 62. And again, you can see now the scratches on the seats are a darker color, so we'll change those to the lighter value. Something close to what we did for the floor. Okay, that's pretty good. And I'm going to rescale the values for the paint. So for me, this is pretty good so far. I'm going to turn off the turntable, and we're going to put the fabric on the seats. I'm just going to go with the burlap. Again, I'm going to tell it I want a new layer. I'm going to try and do this video in one straight edit so you can actually get a sense of the economy of time using this workflow. So here it's applying the burlap texture to the seat. Now the first thing you see obviously is that's much too large. So I'm going to go down to the burlap base, and I'm going to scale it down by about 25%. Okay, that's a lot better. So I start saving the project as I go. We all know why we do that. Okay, now I've saved the project up to this point, and I'm going to go ahead and select the tube frame structure. I'm just going to go to the military metals again. I'm going to go to a black oxide. It has a little bit less wear than the materials I applied on the floor and the seat. So again, we've automatically gone into the layer that this tube frame now is in. I'm going to lighten up these colors somewhere around a neutral aluminum color. If you go to the Smithsonian website, you'll see that this airplane either had a silver metal interior or it was painted, but it's very neutral, so that's what we're going to try and recreate here. Now, one thing I want to do right away is increase the gloss values of this tube frame. So we'll go basically into the two layers right now that I'm interested in, and we're just going to slide up the gloss value. And again, you can see these changes taking place in real time. Now that I've applied these values, I do want to see this in motion so I can get a good idea of how much shine. I don't want too much or too little on this material. And any changes I want to make will actually render in real time. That's pretty good. And the next thing I want to do is add some specular value that's going to represent a blue-gray sky. And I've done that for both of the color layers for the tube frame. And you can see now as it's moving around, the light value is changing, and we're beginning to approximate what you would see if the airplane were in the air. And we're going to do the conduit. I'm just going to go to bare metal for that and choose a brushed aluminum. Now you're starting to get a feel for how quickly this process can go. I'll turn off the turntable and come in into this aluminum. Go back to my color layer. And you can see that the color layer is fairly dark. So if you want to darken up the actual texture itself, I'm going to go over the specular value, and I can see they've put a pure white on the specular value. I want to bring that down more into the range of the other values that we put in. It's a little bit too much. That's better. And the last thing we'll do is the frame. And I'm going to apply just this basic gunmetal. Again, it's got a fairly strong wear texture associated to it, and I want to use that for this particular tutorial. These materials are going to come in fairly dark, and we'll go ahead and lighten those up and bring them more into the 50% gray scale that you're going to see on an aluminum structure. So I'm in my albedo layer. The steel base obviously is quite dark. We're going to lighten that up. And we'll zoom in here so we can get a better look at the work. And we'll lighten up the paint. The scratches I do want a little darker. And once we get into the specular values, you'll see where we can really start bringing some nice control into this. And we'll lighten up this lubrication value just a tiny bit. So now my color values are pretty close. I want to go back down and actually adjust the scale of these wear patterns. I'm going to take them down a bit. Okay. Let's go over to the specular layer and start making this metal appear more the way it would in the actual environment. And the steel base, we want to go to a fairly neutral gray with some sky blue. The same for the paint. And these, I think these are all values that most developers tend to use fairly regularly. This is a little bit green, so we'll bring that up into the blue a little bit more. And what we'll do now is we'll actually move this model, and you'll be able to see these specular values in real time. So now you can see the composited model here. We've applied all the various textures. I think for this exercise I'm pretty satisfied with the various values that we've assigned to these materials. The next stage would be to come in and hand paint and start detailing these, but the important part in this tutorial is to basically show you the fundamentals of how to get these textures now back into your workflow and out into the working model. So here you can see the basic render with some of the lighting elements activated. Let's evaluate how your model is going to look in the sim. You can move the light around the model as you require. And you can save these camera angles so you can just call them up as you like. Let's say I wanted to change the backdrop brightness. We can go ahead and do that and save that out as another camera. And then we can just jump back and forth between the different camera angles and effects. Now that we're satisfied with the work, we're going to do the magic. This is where a lot of people have got questions and a little bit of confusion around the process. Basically, you've got all these layers over here, multiple layers that you want to condense down into a usable format that you can take into your workflow in GMAX, 3D Studio, and out into FSX and Prepar3D. From your menu, you select the export option. Set the path where you want your assets to go. I've already got a file that I call flattened. I'm going to put them in there. I'm going to designate the format as a BMP. So now it knows where it's going to go, what it's going to be, and you have the option of selecting a single or all of the materials. Most important part is you have all these different options. Make sure that you've selected Prepar3D, and it's going to export these assets out. Once we're done exporting these assets, we'll go back into the basic Photoshop. We'll close Quixel. You can see now the rendering process is completed. The little menu comes up and says as your export is done. So we'll close that out. We'll close out the renderer. And I'm going to save this project. It will open it up with everything saved, your parameters, your cameras, identical to the way it is right now when you closed it down. So we'll shut down the Quixel interface and just go back into your basic Photoshop. The last step in the process is going to be to convert these files that we've created in Quixel into something that we can use in either FSX, Prepar3D, GMAX, or 3D Studio. I'm going to go ahead and open the 4 files. If we want, we can do a bit of post-process work. I'm going to make an alpha channel for the specular file. As you can see, there's a blank alpha channel in here. I'm just going to do a little bit of modification. I'm just going to drop this into my alpha channel. And save this back out. Now for the normal channel, we see that they've already put the alpha channel in, so there's nothing that I really want to do there. I'll just go ahead and close this out. I'm actually going to use the gloss channel that Quixel created. I'm going to use this for my alpha in the texture sheet. So I've dropped that gloss sheet right into the alpha channel, and that should work just fine for the gloss values that we're looking for in the sheet that I've created for the sim. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and save these back out with the changes, modifications that I've made. Save them out in a DDS format. And I'm using the NVIDIA plugin for this. It works really well for me. And I'll go ahead and export the other three out, and we'll go to the next step, which is actually placing them in the simulator. The last step, going to the sim. This is my external airplane file, which is where the working model is living at the moment. And we'll open up the Explorer. Here I have my 3 texture files. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the naming conventions on my files, the DDS files, to match what we've got in the simulator. And we're going to copy these and overwrite. We'll do this for both files. And we're ready to go into the simulator.